Don't you hate it when a fun holiday project like Christmas ornaments turns scary? Lately, a lot of holiday builds have been coming up in my feed, and there was one that really grabbed my attention. That was the inside-out Christmas ornament. So I decided to give it a try and work on some of my lathe skills while I was at it. Don't you hate it when a project doesn't go as planned? It started out just like any other day. Using wood that was about 1.5 inches thick, I took it over to the table saw and cut it down to 1.25 inches. I want my end result to be squares that are 1 inch thick, but since I want to run them through the planer and get them all nicely squared up, I'm going to leave just a little extra room for me to work with. The wood I'll be using is maple and walnut. And now that I have them all cut up, I'm just going to run them through the planer, making sure to run both sides. For the start, I'm just running the one edge through because it was a little bit thicker. But once I get them down to the same thickness, I have to run them through one way, then flip all the boards and run them through the other way. Just again, keeping it square. I'm cutting them down into 8-inch strips. Now each ornament will take 4 of these strips. Since I'm making 4 ornaments, I'll be making a total of 16 strips, 8 maple and 8 walnut. And now I just set them up in stacks of 4. I'm sure that grain pattern kind of plays a little bigger role, but you know, trying to plan it out when I'm going to be turning them inside out seemed a little tricky, so I'm just winging it here. Now I'm using double-sided tape and just cutting it down the middle here with a X-Acto knife, and then just hooking the pieces together. This will hold it tight when it's on the lathe, but won't be as tight as glue, so I'll be able to get them apart when I'm done with the lathe work. Now they're all set up together. I'm just going to use some tape on the ends as just an extra measure to make sure that they all hold together. All right, we are ready to put it on the lathe. So this step, I'm actually carving out just the middle part of the piece of wood right here. And I'll kind of show you how this lays out. This will actually end up being the inside of the ornament. So I tried to make a few different cuts on each of my ornaments so I can show you how it turns out in the end. This all happened so quick. You can see I don't even have time to react. It was over before I knew anything had happened. And thank goodness I was wearing all my safety equipment. That face shield totally protected my face. If I had not been wearing it, I would have taken a few pieces of wood straight to my face. So what happened here is I ended up just taking a little too aggressive of a pass. And since my piece of wood was just being held by 2 points on either side, it came flying out at me. Just to be a little more cautious, I put it on a solid chuck that's going to hold it tight in there. At the end, I sanded with 150 grit sandpaper and then switched to 220 just to get it really shined up and polished. Again, this will be on the inside of your ornament, so you won't be able to finish it afterwards. So you want to do that here. Now here's a better look at what each of the ornaments looks like after I just did this first lathe work. So at this point, I'm marking each of my boards, so when I take off the tape and turn it around to glue it, I can keep them all in order. Now there's one of my ornaments that I don't know what I was doing, but I ended up gluing it incorrectly. And you can actually see where the circles don't quite line up. They're a little bit off. Now with the glue process, don't follow what I did here. Use very minimal glue. Now you want to use enough to hold it, but I used a little too much here and it ended up leaking out and into the middle area. Now you're gonna have a little bit of that. I tried using a lot less glue on my other three, and there was still a little bit of squeeze out that came into that area. I tried to use a Q-tip to get that extra glue really cleaned up, but you just want to have as little cleanup as possible, because in the end, when it's on the inside there, it's super hard to clean up that glue, and you definitely can't really get in there to sand. And yes, I am gluing up in my kitchen right now. It's really cold outside, so if I glue outside, it would take such a long time for this glue to dry. So I just bring everything in, set it all up in the kitchen, and do my glue ups overnight. Luckily, I'm not a huge baker, so having projects laying around the kitchen is really not a big deal. And here's what I'm left with after the glue up. So you can see that the design is now on the inside. Kind of hard to see here. I'm trying to show you that you can see in and through, you can see the design. You'll see it more once we put them on the lathe and carve out the outside a little bit more. But just to give you an idea, and now with the design on the inside, I go back to the lathe to now carve out the outside. Hence the name Inside Out Christmas Ornament. So what I did first was to get the whole thing round. One thing I learned was to do this, you just put your carving tool flat on top. If it bounces around, then you don't have a full circle. If it just sits there nice and smooth, then you've got yourself a circle. So that was kind of a nice trick, so I didn't have to keep stopping it every time. And then after I got a little bit done there, I just went along the whole thing and got it all round to about the same thickness. Now at this point is when I went along and I kind of marked with a pencil the design that I was going for. I've never made one of these before, so I was just kind of winging it here. So my design changed as I went along, but at least the lines gave me something to work towards. This is an easy and quick weekend project. You do have to wait for the glue up overnight, so you can't complete it in one day, but this is definitely just something fun you can go out in the shop and get done for a gift for the holidays, or just something to put on your tree. So at this point, I was just kind of going for a design, trying to do a couple little bumps at the end that came to a point. And it just ended up being a little too weak, and sadly I didn't get it on film, but I ended up breaking off the end. So with that piece broken off, I decided to change my plan, obviously, and make it just come to a point at the end. Now at first I tried just using some of the regular tools here on the lathe to clean it up, but it just was so fragile, it seemed to start breaking it off more, and it wasn't really working for me. So I took it off and took it over to the bandsaw and just cut off that piece. Then I was able just to smooth it out, and it turned out great. Not as I had planned, but still looks good. Then I just sanded them up right here on the lathe. This is honestly so easy to sand. Then I stopped the lathe and just sanded out the inside with that 220, just to make sure there weren't any rough edges right on the inside. done with the lathe work. Looking pretty good. Not too bad for my first one. Using the bandsaw, I cut off the ends just to get them ready for sanding. And heading over to the sander, I just sanded them up, got them all smooth. This one was just a little bit trickier, just because it was curved, and man, it was really hard to get those curves nice and smooth, but keeping it an even arc around. So I did what I could here, and I'll do the rest by hand. And now when you can see, I went through just a little bit on the lathe. Not a big deal since it'll be up at the top and you won't see it, but. Now the last one I made just come to a point on the end. So I'm just smoothing that out here. And I just sanded up those edges with 150 and then 220 just to get them all nice and polished so they'll match the rest of the ornament. To attach the tops, I pre-drilled and then just carefully screwed in the holders just to make sure that they were threaded in there. At this point, I just put a little bit of super glue on the screws, then screwed it into the ornament just so that it'll hold it tight in there and won't come out. To finish them up, I used Odie's oil. You can use anything you want. I used Odie's because I wanted to have them completed that minute and be able to put them on the tree. So when I used the Odie's and just polished it in really good, they were shiny, they were protected, and I could hang them up immediately. I could have also used a spray coat of polyurethane, but then I would have had to let them dry overnight. And they're finished. Other than the big safety mishap that happened mid-project, I think this was a good success. There's definitely a lot that I learned, and I think that I could improve on these a lot. But it was a really fun project to do and really got me using the lathe and working on my skills a lot more, which is honestly what I really need. What I loved most about this project was that it gave me a chance to really work on my lathe skills, have a finished product at the end that I could enjoy, and something that didn't take me very long.